Wanted to introduce Dr. Stixrud, who many of you, I'm sure you know who he is already, but for those of you who don't, he's a nationally recognized clinical neuropsychologist, as well as an author, as well as a BroadFutures Advisory Board member. Bill has authored 2 books, one of which you may already be familiar with, The SelfDriven Child. But there's another book that he has authored that is coming out, I believe, Bill, it's on the 16th of August, 16th or 17th. Bill's still muted, but yeah, is it?
Yeah, August 17th.
17th, okay. And that is called What Do You Say? How Do You Talk with Kids to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and a Happy Home? And that's really the impetus of why we're here today. At BroadFutures, we have been seeing increased levels of stress and anxiety. It was happening before COVID, but COVID has exacerbated it. We've also kind of seen decreased levels of motivation and then continuing challenges with independence. So what we're seeing and what we want to help our community with and what Bill is doing was sort of a perfect synergy. And so this is a perfect time for us to reflect and let Bill chat with us about this. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Bill, and if you have questions that you want to put in the chat, we're going to get to those at the end. If you want to do them verbally, that's fine. But if you're someone who prefers to chat, we'll be monitoring the chat and try to get to them at the end. Okay. So over to you, Bill.
Thank you, Carolyn. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. In the early days, before they started BroadFutures, I met with Carolyn and the other founders of BroadFutures a couple of times. They wanted just to get a sense, is there really a market for this? Is there a need for this in our community? And I really felt that there was. And one of the things we talked about was if we're talking about internship program for kids with learning disabilities, it's not really the learning disabilities so much that makes it hard for kids to be successful in the workplace. It's really more executive functioning issues, kind of lack of internal motivation or drive, and difficulty handling stressful situations. And with my colleague, Ned Johnson, we've written these 2 books, The SelfDriven Child and our new book, What Do You Say? And I want to kind of share some ideas from both books that I think are useful in terms of communicating, certainly with teenagers and young adults, in ways that can foster the development of internal motivation, this high stress tolerance, and the independence. And so the first thing I'll mention is that in Ned's and my first book, The SelfDriven Child, the main thesis is that one of the most important things we can do for kids is help them develop a healthy sense of control of their own life. And we got to think that a sense of control is so important, in part because it's really huge for mental health. One of the guys who studied a sense of control in animals says it really, you have a sense of control of your own life, it inoculates you from the harmful effects of stress. It inoculates you in the sense that you got a feeling like I can handle stuff. Life isn't that stressful. It's when you think something's happening and I don't know what to do about it, that I'm not sure I can handle this. That's when it's really stressful. So the sense of control or autonomy is huge for emotional well-being and stress tolerance. And it's also huge for motivation. Everywhere Ned and I look to try to understand, how do young people, kids and teenagers, become self-motivated? All the arrows point in the direction of autonomy. You have to have a sense that this is my life, and I'm going to get out of it what I put into it. And the challenging thing is that in some of the kids who are doing BroadFutures internships, who have learning disabilities or ADHD, some kids on the spectrum, there's virtually no effort to promote a sense of autonomy or control in kids who have these issues. I mean, I could find like one study on promoting autonomy in kids with learning disabilities, none with ADHD, none with autism. There's very little attention to this crucial piece of promoting the sense that this is your life. And so I'm going to talk about, what I want to talk about is how do we promote that? And also just, I felt for my whole career that my experience has been that kids don't become independent if they don't have that sense that this is my life. And many kids with ADHD and learning disabilities, they just had so many years of people trying to get them to do stuff, and they're resisting other people's attempts to get them to do stuff. but they don't develop that healthy self-drive. And they also don't develop the confidence they can handle situations. So let's talk a little bit about motivation. Let's talk about that first piece. And for me, the kind of the postulates for thinking about motivation are: you can't make another human being do something against his will, and you can't make a kid want what he doesn't want, and you can't make him not want what he wants. And just realizing that we're kind of powerless in this way is actually very empowering, because we stop trying to do stuff that's really impossible to do. And the other postulate is that the kids have a brain in their head and they want their lives to work. And that's the part of the kid that we want to be communicating with, the kids that who want their life to work. And we want to try to avoid motivating kids through fear or guilt or anger, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't work to develop that internal drive. And I was at a school meeting right before the pandemic on a kid who was in eighth grade at a Catholic school and was really doing terribly. And he had two learning specialists working with him and a tutor and his mom on him a lot. And he'd only do any work if somebody was on him. And that didn't bode well for developing internal motivation. I suggested they change that energy, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But also the principal said, I met with the kid. This is a good principal. He said, I've met with this kid a couple of times and told him, this is an important year. You're applying out to high schools. You got to take this more seriously. And what I suggested is that they change the message, because that trying to use fear to motivate a kid who's already completely discouraged and anxious and feeling helpless and hopeless, it just doesn't work. And so what I suggested is tell him, actually, it's just not that big a deal where you go to high school. I mean, and if you don't get it together this year, you get it together next year. You'll figure it out. If you want to transfer someplace, you can do that. But so that's the postulates that. And now, one of the really, I think the best theory regarding motivation, the development of that intrinsic internal motivation, is self-determination theory. Brilliant theory, been around for 30, 40 years. And it holds that for kids to develop that internal motivation, they have to have three needs met: for a sense of relatedness to their teachers or their parents or their mentors or their boss, for a sense of autonomy and a sense of competence. And when kids are growing up in this area, and certainly many areas around the country, we way overemphasize competence. We their achievement, and we way underemphasize their autonomy. And when we focus so strongly on achievement, we often undermine our relatedness. And the thing is that a close relationship with parents is about as close to a silver bullet for protecting kids emotionally as you can get. It's so powerful. And it's interesting that this research that started 20 years ago that found that kids from affluent families who go to high achieving schools are at much higher risk for anxiety disorders, depression, substance use disorders than middle class kids are, in part because all the tremendous pressure to achieve, but also in part because kids from these families don't feel as close to their parents. They don't have that protective factor of being feeling really close to parents. And in writing our second book, this What Do You Say book that's focused on communicating with kids, that Ned and I met with dozens of teenagers and kind of a lot of older teenagers, like 16, 17, 18-year-olds. And we asked them, who do you feel closest to? And invariably, what they said is somebody who listens to me but doesn't judge me, and somebody who doesn't tell me what to do. And it's sometimes an uncle, sometimes an aunt, or sometimes an older cousin or a friend or a teacher, and sometimes as parents. And it's fine. We want a community of people to be supportive of our kids. It doesn't always have to be us. But I think that the key, that having a close relationship, feeling connect with your kid, is so important. And the keys really are empathy and validation. That's how really we get close to kids. We stay close is by expressing rather than judging them, we try to understand them. And rather than judging their experience, we validate that a lot of people would feel like that. And Carl Rogers was pioneered field of psychotherapy. Was a pioneer in the field of psychotherapy in the 1950s and 60s. And he introduced this technique of reflective listening, where, I say, I come in, I'm pissed about something, and he sound like really upset about that. Just kind of rephrases what I'm saying in a way that lets me know he's trying to understand and not judge me. And in working on our new book, Ned and I met with this guy named Aran Magan, who's from Israel, who is an expert on communication. And to describe this process, he uses the acronym WIG, what I got. The idea is what I got from what you just said is, and you kind of feed back to a kid or your spouse or an adult or anybody else, your employee, what you heard to give the message that I'm trying to understand and I'm not judging and I'm not dismissing. Rather, so a kid, example in our book, a high school kid comes home and he's really pissed because he didn't do well on a test, and he didn't prepare for it. He didn't study. And so it'd be typical for many of us to say, well, what do you expect? You didn't really work hard. Or the kids could say, well, all stuff on the test that we didn't really prepare for, that you didn't teach us. And you say, well, I know she wouldn't put stuff on the test. It's like that, we're denying their feelings, or we're challenging them, or dismissing them. You shouldn't be so upset. It's not that big a deal. And as opposed to, it sounds like that's really upsetting to you. I could, if there's stuff on the test that you didn't study for, I imagine that other kids were upset too. That's the validation part where you say, a lot of people, I'd feel like that. A lot of people feel like that. It's normal to feel like that. And this kind of expression of empathy and validation doesn't mean that we agree or that we approve of everything kids are saying. It just means that we're trying to understand without judgment. And one of the ways we get close and stay close to people is we share strong emotional experiences. And when our kids have strong emotions, and our young adult children have intense experiences, if we can be there with them, and we can stay calm, and we can help them understand without judging, that it makes us closer. And it also, we communicate that I can handle your feelings, no matter what I can handle your feelings, which is really, really important. And when we're connected with kids, it's much more likely that they're going to go along with us, or that they'll listen to us, but when we give advice, or that they'll follow our example, that we can model them. So I think that one of the keys that we talk about, particularly in the second book, the first chapter in What Do You Say is about communicating with the kids to develop this sense of connectedness and closeness. And there's other stuff. I mean, it's certainly one of the most powerful tools for staying connected with kids is spending time alone with them and young adults. I mean, I learned about this when my kids were little, from the time they were preschool until the time they went to college. I spent an hour on Sunday. I spent an hour a week with one kid, and then with the second kid after that. And I said to them, there's 168 hours in a week. And if I can't find 2 to spend it with you and you, there's something terrible that picture. And when they went to college, I'd make sure that after they came home, that I'd have time just to be alone with them, because that's the way you really get to know people. You stay connected, is being alone. So we talk about the communication strategies, the empathy, the validation, also some things like just emphasizing the shared interest and this kind of individual time. And another key part of this, in both of our books, we talk about the idea of parents and other adults in young people's lives, as much as possible, being a non-anxious presence. And I didn't make this term up. I wish I did, but the guy by the name of Edwin Friedman made this term up, who was a family therapist and a rabbi and a systems thinker, and he consulted with all kinds of systems, with families, with schools, with churches, with synagogues, with corporations. And what he concluded was that organizations work best if the people in charge are not highly anxious and emotionally reactive. That the Navy SEALs, one of their mantras is calm is contagious, because they go into situations where there's a lot of stress and they're supposed to calm this down. And if they can stay calm, they can help calm the situation down. And the SEALs say, that's true because every emotion is contagious. In our first book, particularly, we talk about the stress contagion, but also this idea that calm is contagious. And it turns out when we're not anxious, it's much easier to be empathic, and it's much easier to support autonomy. When parents or other adults are more anxious, it just makes it harder to really trust kids, to let them to try things out on their own, to not overparent, to not be overly directive of them. And so we emphasize in both books how do we communicate this non-anxious presence, and ideally, home is a safe base. I mean, that kids are living at home, that when they come home from a stressful day, it's not just arguing or going back and forth in a stressful way. And part of the reason that we started to think about this was that these animal studies by this brilliant psychologist, Michael Meany, where years ago he separated rat pups from their mothers for 15 minutes twice a day for the first 2 weeks of life. And what happens is that the rat puppies, when they were separated, they'd be completely stressed out and freaked out. And they'd go back to their mothers, who were high-licking and grooming mothers, non-anxious, high-licking and grooming mothers. And the mothers would lick the pups and kind of restore them, to calm them down. And then they'd do this again, kind of rinse and repeat kind of idea for 2 weeks. And at the end of the 2 weeks, Meany and his colleagues called these rats California laid-back rats, because it's almost impossible to stress them, because they had that experience of being stressed, but then being able to recover, and then it's going to be okay. I can handle something stressful because I can recover. So thinking about home as a safe base is a good idea. And in both books, we talk about various ways that if we aren't, by temperament, not anxious, there are ways that we can move in that direction. And certainly one thing is that we want to emphasize with young adults, kids and young adults, we want to take a long view, because the fact is that most kids turn out pretty well. And the world is so full of late bloomers. I mean, God, I can't tell you. I've seen thousands of kids who are disasters when they were 10 or 20 or 30. I tested a kid a few years ago whose dad had been homeless between 30 and 40. And I don't remember exactly. His brother offered him a job. He said, "This isn't what I want anymore." He stopped using drugs. And he had a lovely, I saw the kid when he was probably 5 or 6. So the guy's probably close to 50. But had a lovely kid, a lovely wife. And who would have predicted that? The kid was 35. There's a story in the second book about a kid I saw when he was 23 who was smoking pot. He'd finished college, but no, I'm sorry, he didn't. He didn't finish college. He kept flunking out of college. He finished high school because he went to a boarding school and everybody's on top of him all the time. But he flunked out of college multiple times, couldn't hold a job, 23 years old, smoking pot in his parents' basement, going to bed at 4 a.m, getting up at noon, playing video games all day and smoking pot. Now this kid wanted, he was open for a change. And so, and I said, you got to treat the pot and the video games as addictions if you want this to change. They also told the parents that you can't let him freeload, that you can't let him be at home if this is what he's doing. You let him know if he's volunteering, if he's taking classes, if he's working, cool, we're happy to have you here. But you can't freeload here. And I knew that this kid wasn't chronically mentally ill, and I knew that they could do this and risk him being homeless. But that a year and a half after I saw this kid, I get a letter from the parents saying he's finishing a 2-year degree in community college. He's driving 50 miles each way to a job. He's got a girlfriend. A year and a half later, he's got a degree in engineering. He's working responsibly. He's getting married. And I wouldn't have predicted this at 23. I wasn't that optimistic with a kid who had so much failure and felt so much shame about his not doing well. So taking a long view, realizing just how profound the development of the prefrontal cortex is, can help. Also, I felt my whole career that when I used to do therapy, and I did a lot of therapy early in my career, I'd work with parents and I'd say, let's set our highest goal, simply enjoying your kid. Because if a kid feels like my parent, I feel that people enjoy me, he decides I'm a joy-producing organism, as opposed to a frustration or anxiety-producing organism. And one of the things that got me thinking about this was when I was in my mid-20s, I I I went through some transitions where I kind of wasn't real close to the people who've been my close friends through college, and I hadn't made new friends, and so I felt I was in a place where I didn't have a lot of friends. And there's this one, and when I see my old friends, there's always there's some tension, discomfort, and there's this one couple that even if I stopped by unannounced, they were just happy to see me. And I just remembered how nourishing it was for me at the time. Just people spontaneously happy to see me. And the first couple of years of my practice in probably 1985, I consulted with this kid who was 21, who had a drug problem in high school and was starting to had not done well in college classes, wanted to get it together. And I asked him, I said, "Is there anything your parents could have done when you were in high school that would have made this better?" And he said, "It probably would have helped if they were happy to see me sometimes." So what happens is that they're because the parents, understandably, the kid was screwing up and they had to be chronically disapproving. But simply, if we can, as much as we can, enjoy our kids. And in our new book, we talk about John Gottman's research on marriages, where they have this kind of magic formula, this magic ratio of good marriages. The interactions are positive. The ratio of positive to negative interactions is 5-1. And ideally, that's what we maintain with our kids, at this 5-1 ratio of positive, loving, respectful interactions, comments. I don't tell you enough, but I'm really happy you're my son. I'm so glad that you're able to come over. It's always good to be with you. Just as much as we can, encouraging positive, loving messages, this 5-1 ratio is useful. These really interesting, these studies of the brain respond, just hearing the word no, you get these massive release of stress chemicals. And you hear the word love or the word yes, completely different. So as much as we can consciously give kids the message that we love them, no matter what they do, no matter what they say, no matter what they achieve. That doesn't mean that we approve of everything or we let them freeload at home. But it does mean that what's really nourishing is that unconditional love, and expressing that as much as we can helps to build our motivation, our relatedness, and eventually helps with stress tolerance. And we also talk about radiating this non-anxious presence and meditation through meditation. And both Ned and I are big fans of transcendental meditation. I practiced for 47 years now. This kid with autism, this young adult with autism, he and his mother learned transcendental meditation. And this reporter asked him, "So what do you notice that TM does?" He says, "TM calms the mind and it calms the mom." And in the book, we talk about one of Ned's clients learned TM. He said, "It's just so interesting because I didn't realize it, but my kid would do this. My teenage kid would do this stuff that would just ordinarily just piss me off, and it just didn't upset me. And so we can move in that direction of being non-anxious, non-reactive." And I was really encouraged because we had this idea in the first book, the SelfDriven Child, Non-Anxious Presence. And I've got the feedback that people are calling the TM centers now saying, I want to be a non-anxious presence in my family. I mean, you think about it, that what do infants respond to? The warmth and responsiveness. You can't lecture them, you can't scold them, you can't discipline them. That's all that's the fuel for human beings. And you think about it, if you come home and you screwed up at work and you got to tell your wife or your husband, would you rather that they're warm and empathetic, or why did you should have done this differently? So that this relatedness part is huge for motivation, huge for stress tolerance. Now, I want to talk about another idea, which is autonomy. And so this autonomy, it really is the key to motivation. And the way Ned and I think about it is that one of the best metaphors for our role as parents, as supporters of autonomy, is as consultants. And what happened in my clinical experience was that very early in my career, actually the first year I was at Children's Hospital as a neuropsychologist, and I tested these two kids in the same week. One was 19, who had flunked all his college classes the first semester, was in the second semester of his freshman year in college. And the parents told me that he's doing much better. He's going to see his professors every time. He's going to all his classes. And the kid told me, I haven't been to school. I haven't been to class in 3 weeks. I'm going to flunk everything this semester as well. And I also saw a 7th grade girl with also had ADHD, but would dutifully come home from school and would sit down with her mother and do it. She needed her mother's help to do it, but would do her little homework before she went out and played. And I asked myself, what's the difference in these kids? It can't be completely brain development. We didn't know much about brain development in 1985, but it couldn't be maturity. She's 7 and he's 19. And what I concluded was that she had the correct sense that this work is my work, it's my responsibility. And the mother was willing to help her, thank God. But the kid had this kid, he told me that he's had so many years of people trying to get him to work, and trying to do more, make him do stuff. And he just spent all his adolescent energy resisting other people's attempts to get him to work. I had experiences where I'd go to school meetings, and like this kid I told you about at this Catholic school, where adults are spending 90 units of energy trying to get the kid to work, and the kid will spend 10. And when the adults get more anxious and they go up to 95, the kid spends 5. And I realized that doesn't change until the energy changes. And I've worked my whole career with a lot of underachievers. And I always ask them, if you don't turn in an assignment, who's most upset? And invariably, they say my mom. Then they say my dad. Then next most is my teacher. Then my therapist, then my sister. And the kid's never on the list. And it just seemed to me there's something wrong with that picture. And one of my closest friends who I grew up with is also a neuropsychologist, 30 or some years ago, did training in a kind of psychotherapy where the therapists were taught, don't work harder to help your clients solve their problems than they do, because they're going to end up thinking that the source of solutions to their problems are within you, not within them. And over the last 30 years, I've trained hundreds of tutors to work with kids with learning disabilities and ADHD. And I've always taught them, don't work harder to help your kid get better at reading or writing or whatever it is than the kid does, because you're going to weaken him, because you're going to reinforce the idea that someone other than him is ultimately responsible. So what happens when I saw this kind of stuff, and so 1986, I wrote an article in McCall's magazine simply on how not to fight with your kid about homework. And I simply suggested, tell your kid, I love you too much to fight with you about your schoolwork. And the basic idea is I love you more than anything, and I love you more than your schoolwork. I love you more than your homework. I'm not going to fight about it, because it takes two to fight, right? And so you say, I'm not going to fight, and that's kind of it. And so I suggested, think of yourself as a consultant. Say, I'm willing to help in any way I can. I'm willing to be your consultant. I'm willing to sit with you from 6:30 to 7:30 every night. I'm willing to help in any way I can. But I'm not willing to fight with you. I'm not willing to chase you around the house. I'm not willing to act like somehow I'm supposed to be able to make you do your work. I couldn't make you do it. All you'd have to do is fall on the floor or start screaming. I couldn't make you do this work. And so I introduced this idea of parents, as the kids get older, think of yourselves more as consultants than as the kid's boss or the manager or somebody who always knows best. Because ideally, the goal is for kids to learn how to run their own life. I was lecturing in Houston about the self-driven child a couple of years ago, and I happened to mention one of the most elite schools in DC, and I don't remember why. But afterwards, this woman came up to me and said, I'm a therapist here at the Manager Clinic in Houston. It was this very prestigious mental health clinic. And she said, we know this independent school in DC really well because so many of their graduates get into the most elite colleges, but they can't handle them emotionally. So they take a medical leave of absence and they come here for treatment. And she said, 201, they simply don't have experience running their own lives. They learn how to do school, they learn how to do sports, build a resume, but they didn't really learn how to run their own lives. And that's our goal, is for kids to be able to run their own lives. And the 3 implications of this parent as consultant kind of idea, number one, that we want to offer help or offer our advice and not try to force it on kids. Number two, as much as from the time they're little, we want to encourage kids to make their own decisions. I've felt my whole career, the best message you can give a teenager, besides I love you more than anything, is I have confidence in your ability to make decisions about your own life and to learn from your mistakes. And I want you to have a ton of experience doing that before I send you off. That's how you develop confidence. That's how you develop resilience. Is you decide and you see, and people, that message of confidence. I respect you. I have confidence in you is so empowering to kids. And it turns out that kids, teenagers, and young adults are capable of making very good decisions for themselves. They're more impulsive, but they're capable of making very good informed decisions for themselves. So that's the second implication. And the third is we want kids to solve their own problems. It's solving their own problems that I did this exercise with somebody from from the Parent Encouragement Program, PEP, which I love. I love their work. Years ago, on NonAnxious Presence, that was the title of our presentation. And we did this exercise where we made scenarios like you got a 17-year-old kid who comes home and he's just got dumped by his girlfriend, or he just got cut from the basketball team, or something, or you got a third grade girl who the only one in her friend group who wasn't invited to a birthday party. And the first question we ask ourselves before we intervene in any way is, whose problem is it? And it's hard to remember, and I'll talk a little bit more about why this is. It's hard to remember that it's kids' problems. And the way to become resilient, the way they develop that confidence, that high stress tolerance, is by handling stressful situations and figuring them out. And then that's how you develop the confidence and the ability to tolerate is by doing it. And so we hear a lot about helicopter parenting and lawnmower parenting and just protecting kids from many obstacles, and that kind of idea. And we want to be supportive of kids, and particularly little kids. We help them co-regulate their emotions. But as they get older, as much as possible, we want to be supportive, but we don't want to jump in and solve kids' problems because we really weaken them in that way. And so, and I'll just mention that a woman who there's a family. I've seen families where I've seen all 4 or 5 of their kids. There's one family who had multiple kids, and I tested them all. And Ned, my co-author, who does test prep, had done test prep for like SAT for the kids, and so we knew the family well. And the youngest kid was a hot mess. When he was, last time I saw him, he was 15, and nothing was going well. And the mom, who's incredibly competent, incredibly smart and competent, just was on the kid a lot. Everybody's on the kid a lot, and but she trusted Ned and I enough to say, well, I'm going to try to implement this. So she really took this kind of hands-on, kind of hands-off kind of approach, and just supportive, but not trying to direct, not trying to manage. She didn't look at his grades. She didn't monitor his homework. And she sent me an email, I guess last year, saying he was just invited, as a senior, he was just invited to the National Honor Society. And 2 of his teachers said he's just an incredible person. This kind of approach, this consultative approach, is really powerful. And it works for teenagers, it works for young adults. And two of the ways in our new book, we talk about the language of a consultant, and two of the dimensions are, number one, the language of no force. The consultants don't try to force, and I think that I'm often asked to talk young people into stuff. The parents are trying to take their medicine kind of idea, and I say I don't believe in talking to kids about talking them into stuff. But I'm happy to talk to him about it. And so recently I saw a kid who, I guess it was 8th grade, and he refused for 6 years to take medicine for the ADHD that had been diagnosed when he was in 2nd grade. And his pediatrician the year before had a come to Jesus meeting with him and said, you got to take this mini kid. And his kid said, make me. And the mother wanted me to talk. I'll talk to him about it. I just said to him, I don't want anybody to try to force you to take this medication. And if anybody tries to make you, what I want you to do is practice putting your cheek, pretend it's swallowing, and then spitting it out. And I'll tell your parents, I don't want anybody to try to force you to do it. But you're smart enough to make an informed decision. And I'd suggest you make an informed decision. So I suggest you try it out and see what it does. Because it doesn't help you, you aren't going to use it. The bad side effects, you aren't going to use it. If it really helps you, you can decide to use it or not. And this kid's 14. And I said, even if it helps you, nobody's going to make you take it. This kid decides 2 days later, I want to take the medicine. I get a call from the mom 6 weeks later saying he's a straight A student from a straight C student. And the medicine isn't always that dramatic. It's rarely that dramatic. But in this case, it was like turning on a light switch. And it happened, this message of I'm not trying to force you. And I think that when I meet resistant kids are resistant to doing the testing, I just say, look, the first thing I want to tell you is that you don't have to do this. No, I couldn't make you do this. But if you close your eyes, when you prop your eyes open, I couldn't make you. Put your head in the desk. I couldn't make you do this. And would it be okay if we talked for a minute about what you might get out of it? We'd have that kind of conversation. And I've never had a kid I couldn't test, but I always start out by reminding them I'm not going to try to force. And I say I have confidence that you can figure this out on your own. And if you need help, I'm willing to help. Ross Green, who has done a lot of groundbreaking work with the most resistant, difficult, rigid kid, concluded a few years ago that the best thing we can do with kids who are resistant and rigid is say, I'm not going to try to use the force of my will to make you do things. And it can be threatening because we experience a low sense of control, which is really stressful. But ultimately, it's very empowering because we give up these futile attempts to try to use force to motivate kids. And we also talk in the book about the language of getting buy-in. So many parents tell me, I've told them a million times, or I keep telling them, I keep explaining it. And if it didn't land the first or second time, it's not going to land the third time or the fourth time or the fifth time. And so what we suggest is we say stuff like, I got a suggestion. Can I run it by you? Or, is there a way that I could help with that? Or would it be helpful if I, whatever? Or I often use the phrase for whatever it's worth. When I want to share some information with somebody, I don't want to sound like I'm preaching, and I don't want to sound like I'm forcing. I often will say for whatever it's worth. Then I'll just kind of lay it out. Where I'm giving the message, you don't have to believe this, you don't have to buy it, you don't have to go along with me if to do what I'm saying. And I got this from this PEP, this Parent Encouragement Program. I wonder what would happen if you, is another way of offering a suggestion without having it feel that we're trying to force. Now, when many parents ask me, how do I motivate my kid? How do I get them to be more motivated? How do we get them to care about stuff? And in some ways, they're asking, how do I change my kid? And in our new book, we take some lessons from the science of change, and we focus on two particular approaches. One is called motivational interviewing. The other is the new SPACE program. It's an acronym that stands for supporting. Supportive parenting of anxious childhood emotions. It's a program for treating anxiety in children and teenagers and young adults that only works with the parents. But for both programs, they have the idea that you can't change someone unless they're asking you to help them. And if we try to change people, that we just meet with resistance. And so the best way that we promote change is by changing ourselves. And in both these approaches, it comes down to, in many ways, it comes down to listening more and talking less. And that's in our new book, What Do You Say? The title of this chapter is the language and silence of change, because so much of it is listening. Now, I want to tell you a couple of things from this motivational interviewing that I've found to be really helpful. There's two great insights from motivational interviewing. The motivational interviewing, it's a form of discussion that's used a lot in various therapies now. that is supposed to, it's supposed to help kids and adults find their own reasons for change. And two of the brilliant insights, number one, that we all have a righting reflex, which is somebody brings us a problem. We say, well, you should do this or this or this, and particularly with our kids. We have that righting reflex. They bring us a problem, and we try to solve it for them, as opposed to, I said earlier, letting them solve it themselves with support. And the other brilliant insight is that most people, and for most things, they're ambivalent about changing. I mean, you could be 200 pounds overweight, and it wouldn't be lost on you that there'd be advantages to losing weight. But also, it wouldn't be lost on you that it'd be really hard, that the deprivation, that would be very difficult. What if you're really trying, you can't do it, it'll make it worse. And so this idea that we argue both sides of a change, and what tends to happen with young people and parents and other adults is we keep arguing this one side of you should do this, or this, and they to themselves or to us will argue the other side. And so motivational interviewing realized that in part because this work started with people who had chemical problems, particularly alcohol. What they found was that they could be rational and say that your life would work a lot better if you didn't do this stuff, and it wouldn't help them. But simply if they used empathy, if they just listened and used this reflective listening that I talked about earlier, that people would drink less whether they signed up for a treatment program or not, just feeling understood and not judged. Just that in itself was very powerful in terms of getting people to change. And so the idea is that we don't want to kind of just continually to tell young people, you need to do this. This is so important to do this, because it's not that they've never thought about it. One of my colleagues called me about an 18-year-old who was screwing up in school, and he said to the parents just so focused on the grades. And I said, the kid has ADHD, untreated ADHD. And I said, well, it's unlikely this kid never had the thought, I'd like to do better than I am. But he's also probably had the experience, I've tried a million times, I can't make myself work more. And so arguing that you need to do this, you need to do this, the kid just argues the other side. And so I love this idea. And what we do is we ask open-ended questions to try to understand our kids better. Stuff like, how's that going for you? How are you feeling about your experience in college or in vocational school, or you're at work? How do you, if a kid has a tough time coming up, how do you see yourself getting through the next couple of weeks? Where just these open-ended questions that encourage self-reflection and encourage kids to clarify their values and their goals. And what we do is we use that empathy and that validation I mentioned earlier. And what we're listening for is what in motivational interviewing they call change talk. And change talk is that's where a kid will say, basically articulate their own reason for changing. And the example in the book of a high school senior who was smoking a lot of pot and met with the school counselor who knows the motivational interview. And the counselor said, first thing I want to tell you is I'm not going to try to talk you out of using pot. I'm not going to, you've heard that speech a million times, but I'd like to understand what it is about pot that kind of works for you. And the girl waxed rhapsodic about how she's so much less anxious in social situations, she can sleep better. And at one point, and the woman just saying, so part of it is sleep, and part of it is you just feel like you can be more of yourself, or you're funnier with other kids. You just enjoy stuff more. She's just in a non-judgmental way, just reflecting back. And the kid eventually says, yeah, but it's really expensive. And so tell me about that. So, well, I don't have any money. I'd like to get new shoes. I'd like to get my hair done. And so then the counselor, well, what would happen if you only bought one bag this week instead of two, something like that? And the girl goes, well, I don't know. Next time she comes in to see the counselor, she's got a new haircut. She got her hair done. And so I only bought one bag this week. And as they continued this process, that this kid started realizing how much pot was interfering with their school performance, and just started to smoke less and less. And this is easier for a counselor to do than for parents, but still we can take this lesson of non-judgment. And it's not that we let kids if do illegal drugs at home, that we set limits. But if we find out our kid is using, if we can try seek first to understand as opposed to judge, it's a really powerful thing. And as I was working on this book, I tested a high school kid who is smoking quite a bit of pot. And I talked to his mom about these ideas, and she tried it out with her kid. And a couple of months later, she said, he really, I just kind of listened to him, kind of tried to understand his experience. And I said, can I offer you a couple of suggestions? And she said, he's not smoking pot. And it's not always like this, but I'm just saying that these ideas can be powerful. And the second program I mentioned from the Science of Change is the SPACE program. And it's a really cool program it's based on the realization that because we're mammals, we're wired to protect our young and to soothe them when they're upset. And that's why it's hard as they get older. It's hard to go against that and let them solve their own problems because our instinct is to soothe them. So what we do with anxious kids is we make accommodations so that we reassure them again and again and again. Or if they're afraid of being in the same a room in themselves by their house, it's a room in the house by themselves, we accompany it. We make these accommodations so to protect them and to protect them from too much anxiety. And what the SPACE program does, it makes no attempt to change the kid. It helps the parents identify the accommodations that they're making. And first, the parents practice what they call supportive statements, which are, I know that being alone in this room, or I know that applying for a job or filling out this application is really anxiety arousing for you. But I'm 100% confident you can handle it. I'm 100% confident you can handle your own anxiety. So it's that empathy plus confidence. And this program has been shown to be as effective with kids and teenagers in reducing anxiety as cognitive behavioral therapy is for the kids themselves. And part of what we say is that I used to think that you couldn't handle this or this. And I'm just seeing this, and I used to think that you needed me to do this for you. And now I'm realizing that I was wrong. That I'm confident you can handle this. And then, so the parents, what happens is parents identify these accommodations that they make, and over time, they progressively just let the kid know in a written statement that I love you. I realize that I've been accommodated in this way. It's not helping. In fact, it's getting worse. And so I'm not going to do this anymore. And I know you can handle it. And interestingly, there's a new branch of the SPACE program, it's a new dimension of it that is focusing on what some people call failure to launch. And the developer of the SPACE program, Ellie Leibowitz, so I love the way this man thinks. He calls it just highly dependent young adults. I mean, and so the focus with young adults on giving them this message that I used to think that you couldn't do this stuff on your own. And now I realize that I was wrong, that I can, and I want to support you in any way I can. And I'll close by saying that, and certainly for anybody who has a kid who's having trouble launching, and if you find yourself kind of trying to change your kid, it's so incredibly powerful to change your own steps, change your own reactions, the way what you do, what you say and do for your kid. And find a therapist who's trained in SPACE, who can help, who could just do some coaching in this area, because it's a very, very powerful tool. And the last thing I'll say is, because Ned and I have written so much about and lecture so much about this, the idea of autonomy and supporting the sense of control, people ask, what about limits? And we think that certainly punishment really has no role in child rearing. I mean, it's just not effective. It's not effective at improving behavior, maybe short term, but not long term. It really undermines your relationship. It undermines motivation. So we're happy with kind of the natural consequences. Kid forgets to bring his lunch box and eat lunch that day and remember the next day. And we love collaborative problem solving. We love the various people have written about this for years. Ross Green, who I mentioned earlier, who famous from the book, The Explosive Child. has a website called livesinthebalance.com, livesinthebalance.com. It has a lot of good illustrations of this collaborative problem solving. But it always starts with empathy. The collaborative problem solving is when you're calm and your kid's calm, you sit down together and just say, I know you express how you feel. Here's how I feel. Let's find a solution. And so I was going to tell you a story, a really interesting story about a kid whose father kid was completely screwed.
Tell the story, and then I want to take 5 minutes for questions. We have a
Well, I'll tell the story. I'll tell the story.
No, go ahead.
So in any case, one of my closest friends had a daughter who, as a teenager, was just constantly breaking rules, constantly sneaking out, going to parties and drinking. And one night, Friday night, he has a meeting. His wife's out of town, and the girl has a party at home. Neighbor calls and says, and then they haven't had a civil conversation, the parents and his kids, for 2 years. And a neighbor calls, and she had a party, they're all drinking. Father comes home, everybody's cleared out. The girl denies it. The girl said that he's lying, it never happened. And my friend had the presence of mind of saying that if I was lying straight faced to my parents, I'd probably feel a little guilty about it. And so, what I just want you to know that whatever happened here, you have amnesty. You got amnesty. It's like it never happened. And he went to bed, and she came into his bedroom a few minutes later and said, "Dad, I had a party, and I'm sorry," and just apologized for all the stuff she's been doing. And what the dad said was, I mean, I drank as a kid, teenager. I wasn't that crazy about her partying, but that wasn't the thing. It was that lack of closeness in our relationship. And by offering amnesty as opposed to reflexively punishing her, that he said that really it started this healing our relationship, and we became closer and closer. And she admitted, like 2 years later, to all this stuff that she'd done, and apologized for doing all. I just want to tell that story. I'm done.
That's a good story.
Yeah, thank you.
We only have a few minutes. I have one question in the chat, and if anyone else has a question, but people are asking if we can do another just Q&A section. So if you're open to it, Bill, we will set that up. We will send it out to all of our channels. We will also be sending everyone on this information to get the book, along with where the recording is going to be housed on our website, but it will be in the media section because some people are also asking about that. Someone asked in the chat, how do you play the consultant for younger kids, 5 to 9? And I would just like to expand it a little bit, because so many of the folks on this call are dealing with failure to launch or young adults in some way. So I would almost say not just even the young kids, but those kids whose prefrontal cortex may be immature. And so their ability to actually make those decisions may be delayed.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, the prefrontal cortex doesn't fully mature. The cognitive functions until 25 plus minus 3. And if you got ADHD, add a year or two onto that. The emotional regulation functions of the prefrontal cortex, not till 32 plus minus 3. Do we really want to wait until mid-20s or 30s to say, okay, make your own decision? It just doesn't make any sense. Also, as I said, kids with ADHD, kids who have, by definition, have immature prefrontal cortex, 8-year-olds can make good decisions for themselves if we help them think through the pros and cons. So what we want with 5-year-olds, what we want to do is we want to say, you're the expert on you. You're the one who knows when you're hungry, you know when you're full, you know what it feels like to be when you're nervous. You're the expert on you. That's one message. Also, do you want to do it this way or this way? Little kids, we give them choices. We let them practice making decisions, but with restricted range. And as they get older, we broaden. We say, I want you to practice making decisions about this stuff. But with adolescents, we should be requiring them to make important decisions about their own life, as long as they're willing to talk with people who are more experienced, their parents or somebody else, so that they can make a good informed decision. But my experience is even little kids, I got to this because when I first started, so many kids were being forced to repeat kindergarten and first grade. And I started saying, let's tell the kid, nobody's going to make you repeat. It gets to be your call. And I'd see these 6 or 7-year-old kids who would think all summer about whether they're ready to go to kindergarten, to first grade or second grade. And they could make good decisions for themselves as long as people help them think through. Here's what happens if you do it, if you don't. So certainly with the failure to launch, that if we're making decisions for them, that if we're still acting like we know better than they do, and give them the message, don't trust yourself, trust me. This doesn't change. It doesn't change until the energy, in my experience, it doesn't change until the energy changes. And so, and again, failed lots of people, they can make good decisions as long as you, as long as you help them think through the pros and cons with more experience. And as long as you don't accommodate excessively, and so that's why so much of my focus is on what we can do to change our steps in this stance, change our energy, which because all these things are systemic. If we change, the kid changes.
One last question, which is around, and we have 1 minute, but it's around, and this comes up a lot. How do you talk to your child about freeloading without coming across as I'm going to kick you out of the house, right? So there's this constant, I mean, we deal with this at BroadFutures, folks who just haven't gotten to be able to launch, whether it's to school or to work. And so how do we deal with that in a way that's healthy? Yeah.
And I don't think there's any ideal way to do that, because in our culture, there's no safety net. I mean, for young adults, and oftentimes it comes down to if the kid won't get out of the house or won't get out of the basement, do you let them stay there? And I think that that it depends in part. But there are kids who are chronically mentally ill. The kids who I think will probably never be fully independent. And I think that the solution there, I mean, emotionally for adults, is to make peace with with our worst fears, and then to really focus as much as possible on promoting autonomy. But I do think in this case that I told you about, this kid who was smoking pot all day and playing video games, that the parents, I told the parents, he's not chronically mentally ill. I think that he's not, in likelihood, he's not going to end up homeless. But they took that risk. They took the risk saying, if you can't live here if you're going to do this. And so I think when parents get to that point, if that's the inflection point, I think you want to check in with mental health people to get a sense. Is this kid not capable of doing this? And it's not an easy call. And there's a lot of gray. But I do think that changing our steps often means that I can't in good conscience. I love you too much to feel like I'm enabling you to do this. And I think we can do that. We can give this message in a loving, encouraging, I have confidence you can handle this.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you, everyone. There's a
Carolyn, can I say one more thing?
Yeah. Yes.
If anybody's interested in this new book, Ned and I would appreciate it if you pre-order it on Amazon or Politics and Prose. Yeah, that's all.